on to why does the scene exist? Sutra 21. Tadartha eva drishyasya atma. The scene exists for the seer only. The scene, drishya, exists to be the action, to be the consequence and the experience of the seer. Because all of these things get superimposed onto the seer. Now, I want to ask you something. If something is a scene, it's a drishya, like for example, this eraser is a drishya. If there is no one to see this eraser, does it exist? If all of the minds in the whole universe were shut off, there is no more seeing capability. Does any of this scene exist? Nothing. The scene exists because there's a seer. All of this drishya can only exist if something can see it. All of these knowables can only exist if they can be known. Otherwise, they have no existence whatsoever. So, all of this dish exists for Atma. But Atma does not exist for them. The seer does not exist for the scene. The seer can be completely alone. Consciousness doesn't necessarily have to have a target. But the targets, they're enslaved to Atma. They're enslaved to Vaheguru. Everything is enslaved to Vaheguru. But Vaheguru is not enslaved to anyone. Now you understand in Gurbani where they say Vaheguru doesn't need long arms to do its things. It doesn't need people to do its things. It's completely, utterly powerful on its own. In fact, everything is a slave to God, but God is not a slave to anything. See, when you say it like that, you're like, wow, that's a really moral argument. Wow, God is like that. Wow, so hankari, this, that, whatever. But the people who have written these down, they've personified it so that you could understand this concept. And now that you're understanding this concept directly, you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, actually. It's not a moral thing, it's a technical thing. The seer consciousness can exist without targets, but targets can't exist without something seeing them. So what does this tell you? This whole creation, whether you're on a different planet, on a different galaxy, whether you're interdimensional and you go into the Sukshma Sarir and you interact with beings there, whether you take on an even more advanced body than this one, the seer scene complex exists throughout all of creation. The whole creation, anything that you can imagine, you will have had to see it first. Try to imagine something where you don't see it. It's impossible. Try to think of a scenario where there's no scene-seer complex. It's impossible. This is something that is throughout. This is why this seer-scene entanglement, it exists everywhere and it exists forever. Right? We'll talk about that a little later. Now, when the seer and the scene gets entangled, this is what we call experience. And when they get individualized, this is what we call liberation.